about this question I heard this week. What are you doing here? And I realized that, when we read the Bible, when you come upon a scripture passage, any passage, there's no inflection. We don't know, all you see is the words on the page. You don't know which words are supposed to be emphasized or stressed. I mean, we could read this, what are you doing here? Or we could say, what are you doing here? Or I could say, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And in each case, it would be very different. It reminds me of, as a kid, getting caught with my hand in the candy jar late at night. What are you doing here? My parents would come down. Oh, nothing. Just stealing a cookie. But, it makes a big difference. And, and so this is an important question, though. And you may, if you're a little bit familiar with the Bible, you may know that it was the words of the Lord to Elijah. He had killed someone, he ran away, he went into a cave, sat down, he was about to just give up and surrender. The earthquake, the winds, the rain, the flood, and then he hears this voice. What are you doing here, Elijah? And it's kind of a universal question for all time. What is your purpose? What are you doing here? The Lord asked Elijah that, but I feel like that's a question for all of us, for people of all time to ponder in our lives, for our ministry. What are we doing here? What are you doing here today? And so the purpose of my lesson this morning is to kind of help us to answer that question. What is unity? And how do we share it? What are we doing here? How do you talk about it with people? I've had people say, gee, I've been driving by your building for years. I must have driven by there 1,000 times. I had no idea what was going on. And, we tend to be kind of shy. I think people in unity reticent about not wanting to come across as proselytizing or recruiting people too much. But I really think there are some ways that we can authentically share with people about our experience and be inviting, and at the same time not really, turn people off. And, fewer people, as fewer people today are attending churches than ever before, and fewer people are visiting for the first time. I read a statistic 50 years ago, 90% of people who came to a church for a first time, it was a church of the same denominational background that they grew up in, that they were going to another Methodist church or walking into another Presbyterian. But today, it's like less than a third of that. 30% of people who come to our church may never have been in it. They have no idea what unity is. They're kind of exploring and seeking. And so it kind of behooves us to be kind of clear about how do we share who we are and what we're about. And I had an interesting phone call this week. A woman called me who's an undergrad at Canisius College, and she's taking a religion class, and they had an assignment to go and visit a church that was of a different denomination than what they grew up in. And she had grown up Catholic, but she's not Catholic, doesn't consider herself Catholic now. And she thought, I think I'll look for a non-denominational church. And she just Googled us. And she wanted to come in person, but she's on the soccer team, and their soccer game got changed to be Sunday morning. So she had to watch us online instead of in person. But she was really intrigued. She really liked what we were about, and she called and wanted to know more about unity. And I just thought, you never know when you're going to have an opportunity to have a conversation with someone about who and what we are. What are we doing here? And so I wanted to share some things that I think might be helpful in talking about it. And I've had some people ask me, how do you talk about it? And so I wanted to say two things before I start. One is that obviously we'd like more people to come. We'd like to have a lot more people. But it's really important, sort of the consciousness that we come from, that we don't want to just be thinking, oh, we don't have enough people. We don't have enough, if we just had more people, if we had more money, if we had more this, more volunteers. And that's sort of coming from a consciousness of not enough, always feeling like whatever we have, it's not enough. and so rather, I think we can hold it as a place of, we have something wonderful that we'd like to share. That how many people, what would you say, what brought you to Unity for the first time? Either this church or someone else. So for some curious, maybe you found us on, but how many came because maybe somebody told you the daily word? Oh, you came through the daily, so you knew about the daily word, and then, coming to take some classes that you were interested in. Walking by. Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah. Marcia. Yeah, so you were looking for something that was an open-minded spiritual community. Corey, okay. So a friend, someone told you about it or invited you to come, or that was kind of the answer I was thinking maybe more people would say, is that often the most common reason people come is because someone told them about it or invited them, that we all kind of have that opportunity to share it in some way or another. So I wanted to say two things, is to please think about this in terms of not thinking, oh, we're not enough, but thinking that we are living our purpose. We're on our mission and our vision, and we don't want to be a light under a bushel basket, And then also, as I kind of go through my talk, I just want to preface this. Please don't hear anything I'm saying as being critical of any other faith tradition or religion. That it's just, my point in this talk is just to be clear, that just for us to be able to understand that we have a place at the table in Christianity, that we understand who we are. And there's, I always feel like God created many religions because different people need different things and at different times in their lives. And if you've been coming for a long time and you think you've already heard this before, just kind of listen with a beginner's mind. So as with that statement, what are you doing here? You could emphasize different words and find different meaning in it. But here is a statement that was written by a committee within, what you have to know too is that Unity doesn't have a pope. There isn't one person at the top that writes a letter and sends it down, but it's that major policy decisions and things are voted by representatives of all the churches throughout the Unity Worldwide movement. And so there were several years back, there was a committee that was formed to write a new description of what is Unity. How do we describe it to people? And I think they came up with something pretty good, and it was voted at our convention with representatives from the Unity churches all over the country and the world that said, yeah, I think that we can go with this. And so this is the statement. It's actually 2 sentences, and it's on our sign downstairs. You probably have heard it before. I hope you have. But it's this, that unity is a positive, practical, progressive approach to Christianity based on the teachings of Jesus and the power of prayer. And unity honors the universal truths in all religions and respects each individual's right to choose a spiritual path. So there's a lot there, and you may not be able to memorize it, but I think it does a pretty good job of describing who we are. And I thought I would take some time today to just kind of elaborate this on a little bit. Positive, practical, progressive. And it's an approach to Christianity. As we know, there are many faith traditions, or many denominations within unity. But the positive, I think maybe Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founder, described this best when, she grew up in the 1800s in a time when what she described as a strict puritanical or moral code that taught about a punishing God. And she said there was something in me early on that just protested against this declaration that I was by nature evil and sinful, that she felt like she was getting that message. And so at a very early age, she began searching for something. And in unity, I think by positive, what we mean is that we believe that the Spirit of God that lived in Jesus lives in each and every one of us, that there is an innate goodness in all people, that we're born with an original blessing, not original sin. I always remember one time I was sharing this with someone, that we don't use water for baptisms. We use rose petals for christening to behold the Christ in a child, because we don't believe or we don't teach that there's an original sin that needs to be washed away. And I remember this woman, she almost fell out of her chair. She said, "Oh my God, that is so positive." You can't be positive. Like that, she just had never heard anything like that before. So, we believe that the inherent nature of people is divine and is filled with potential, and that it just wants to be released and expressed. So that's a positive view of humankind. And of course, we, as humans, fall short lots of times, and we say things or do things that are not up to that highest standard. But we know that the word repent really just means to change your mind, that at any time when you do something and you regret it or you need to learn, you can change your mind or choose once again. And Jesus, when he said, turn the other cheek, he wasn't saying, okay, now hit me on the other side. He was saying, turn and look at it from a different perspective to see the goodness in the person. And so, I really think that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founders, were always seeking a better way, or they questioned the orthodoxy of their days, and were seeking, to put together a philosophy or an idea that would be, in their words, positive. And Charles Fillmore, I really think that he kind of had three guiding questions in his search, that he was seeking to see, what do I think is true in my mind? What makes sense to me intellectually? What's true for me in my heart? And what is true for me in my experience? And he was like Elijah. He experienced the winds and earthquakes in life and fires, but ultimately he found his answers by what he would say, going to headquarters, sitting in the silence, listening, developing a deeper relationship with God. So what is true in my head, my heart, my experience? And so maybe that's the practical aspect of Christianity. Unity has been known always. That's kind of been one of our tag phrases, our moniker, is practical Christianity, that our emphasis is on how we live our life now. In this, how are we to live, rather than, getting ready to go, our afterlife. It's about how do we live this every day, especially when the rubber hits the road, especially when it feels like stuff falls apart, especially when we get a medical diagnosis or we have a setback or someone we love passes on. That's especially when we are challenged to lean into our practices. And I heard something the other day, that there's a distinction in our growth and our transformational process. There's translational and there's transformative change. That translational is kind of when we hear a good idea, we hear or we get a spiritual insight. Oh, yeah, that makes sense, But then we're not really, then we just kind of go back to living our life the way we've always lived it. And transformation is when we're really changed to depth, when we can't go back, when some people describe coming to unity as that way. It's like once you know, you can't go back and pretend you don't know it, or you can't. Somebody was telling me last night about their son who's 6 feet tall, and he wears a size 12 shoe, and it's like, it was really clear at a certain point they needed to get out of the kids' shoe department and go to the adult shoe department. And so I think that kind of deeper transformation really happens through classes and more in-depth study. And that's why, these classes they'll be offering this fall, the conversation skills and that quantum living class that Annabelle teaches now. I mean, it's deep transformational work. It's really looking at what's the stuff that maybe some of your shadow work that needs to be released or let go of, or where is it that, we're ready to move forward, but there's something that's still holding us back, or the classes that Marcia offers, all these things can be, studying the Course in Miracles can be transformational. And then, so we talked about positive, practical, and progressive. Well, what do we mean by that? Being progressive. And I think that could mean several different things. By some societal and cultural norms, unity would probably be considered pretty progressive. Thinking about the contributions of women. Just the fact that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore are always referred to as the co-founders of unity. That Myrtle's contributions are considered every bit as equal to Charles' contributions in the founding and development of our movement. And from the very beginning, the first class of people that they ordained, there were many women that were ordained as unity ministers. And in the area of welcoming and encouraging African Americans and people of diverse backgrounds, we haven't always lived up to our ideals, but we've progressed in being much more welcoming and accepting and having diversity at every level and every aspect of our movement. I had shared a year or two ago, there was a unity minister in the Eastern region who was a small person. They used to refer to him as a midget, but I think maybe small person is the proper. She was about 3 feet tall. She was a unity minister, and she was a powerful teacher. And she passed away about a year ago. Her name was Joy Weiler. But she was really an advocate for accessibility of buildings and accessibility for people of different abilities or disabilities. And actually the Eastern region recently, I found out, has created a fund to raise money in her name to be used to take some of the buildings at Unity Village that are older buildings that don't have accessibility, that don't have elevators or things, to make them accessible for everybody. So that's one way that we could think of the word progressive, unity as being progressive, but it's also progressive in that we're continually growing and evolving in our understanding of truth. I love the fact that Charles Fillmore, sometimes he'd be giving a talk and somebody would interrupt him and say, "Charles, that's not the same thing you said 6 months ago," or, you're sort of contradicting yourself. And he said, well, I reserve the right to change my mind, that as I'm growing and learning and evolving in my understanding, sometimes the way I talk about it is going to change and evolve and grow. And he said, what you think today may not be the measure of your thought tomorrow. You know, it's like, I'm not the same person that I was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I hope my relationship, my understanding of God is always evolving. And I read somewhere Ernest Holmes, who's the founder of religious science, which is kind of a sister movement to unity, that he described their philosophy as being open at the top. And I love that, open at the top, that it's always evolving to a greater understanding, a greater way to talk about prayer and our God and the power of our thoughts. So those are, some understandings, as I understand it anyway, of positive, practical, and progressive. And our focus is on the teachings of Jesus. Some approaches to Christianity focus on the life and the birth and the death story. But our emphasis has always been on what was his message? What did he say? How did he say we are to live in this world? And so Eric Butterworth talks about making this distinction between the religion about Jesus, which was what mankind has created over the last 2,000 years, as opposed to the religion of Jesus, which is what Charles referred to as primitive or first century Christianity, getting back to the original message. And remembering that Jesus said, I came not to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill it, meaning that he meant to upgrade, to bring a new and heightened understanding to teachings in light of contemporary experience. And I kind of feel like that's what we're doing in Unity, is continued on that tradition. So Unity focuses on a positive, practical, progressive approach to Christianity based on the power of prayer. Prayer has always been the foundation of Unity. It's how Myrtle, was led to experience a healing of her tuberculosis and go on to live for many years. And also in the teachings of Jesus. But then there's that second sentence, and I just, there we go, positive, practical, progressive, is, I don't know why sometimes it seems like it, is the second sentence is that Unity honors the truth in all, the universal truths in all religions, and respects each individual's right to choose a spiritual path. And I always love the fact that apparently Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, when they were first getting to know each other, they corresponded a lot in letters. And at one point she wrote to Charles and she said, will you question my orthodoxy? Well, if I were called upon to write out my creed, it would be a rather strange mix of things. I am decidedly eclectic in my theology. And is it not my right to be? And I feel like maybe that describes a lot of us here today, that, and Charles was known to have read a lot about world religions, and they attended the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in the 1890s, and they found a lot of commonality and universal truths. And I put up this image with, how many of those symbols do you recognize? What's the one at the very top, the hand? It's Jainism. It's a very small religious tradition, and the second one is the Om symbol, which represents Hinduism, and the wheel is the Dharma wheel of Buddhism. That little bowl, I'm not sure, but I understand that a lot of the native indigenous religions think of a smudge bowl with sweetgrass. And it occurred to me that might be that. And of course, the Jewish star represents Judaism. The yin-yang symbol is Taoism. The cross is Christianity. What is that 9-pointed star? The Baha'i faith. And the crescent with the star is Islam. And the last one is Sikhism. So, and I find these days that a lot of us have found ways to harmonize kind of our spiritual practices or borrow experiences or share in practices from other faith traditions. What are some examples you can think of? Who here's ever done yoga? That comes from the Hindu tradition. Meditation, well, Buddhist mindfulness. I mean, probably all of those traditions, but Buddhism is really strong in meditation. Chanting, I've done a lot of chant, comes from the Hindu tradition. Feng Shui. Actually, that's one that's not represented up there as Chinese religions. Qigong and Tai Chi. I think about Marcia's classes that come out of the Tao tradition, which is from the Asian religions. Spending time in nature. Maybe that could be all, but, indigenous people, native traditions especially emphasize spending time in nature. So when I think about this idea of, of our borrowing, or sharing or harmonizing, taking practices or readings or books or teachers from many faith traditions and finding a way to blend it all together, that's in unity. We don't think of it as either or, but it's both and. You can be interested in a practical, progressive, positive approach to Christianity and appreciate the gifts of many of all the world's faith traditions. So there's one other way that we can talk about sharing unity. And we've kind of answered that question over the last few weeks when I've asked several times, why is it important that you showed up here today? It seemed like almost everybody said connection. I like being with the people, and I feel like our daily word says that. Together, the presence of God unites us in work and play and pray, and I hope this will go the right direction. Yeah, the daily word, it says it makes the job easier when we join with other people. It makes we're more productive. It multiplies the fun. There's more energy and aliveness. It boosts our mood. It lifts our spirits. And something greater emerges. And I think that's the scripture passage when Jesus said, "For where two or more are gathered in my name, I am there too." And it doesn't necessarily refer to the historical figure of Jesus that he's going to show up and sit down at the table. But when two or more are gathered in that consciousness, in the Christ consciousness, something is released from within us. Something within us is released. And I think, what do you think that is, Susan? Wow. Yeah, so it can be literally a physical energy. We feel energy moving through us, but it can be other things. It can be compassion. It can be laughter. It gets released. It can be singing. It can be curiosity. You sit down at a table with other people and have a conversation, and you learned something you didn't know. I didn't know somebody was doing this or that, or was going on a trip, or it might be a generosity of spirit, or something like that. So there's one other statement that we're going to begin using more, and it's kind of being referred to by Unity as an evolutionary purpose statement. And our board really liked this, that we're about transforming lives and inspiring people to make a positive difference in the world. And so that can be a real What is unity? Well, this is what we're about, inspiring lives and inspiring people to make a positive difference in the world. And I just want to, before I close, that Lonnie reminded me today about this brochure that we have. Thank you. And so I want to, this was published years ago, a few years back, but it's professionally designed, but it's a way to share about unity, a positive path for spiritual living. And so I want to just encourage you to take a few of those or think about it. Either share them with somebody or drop them off somewhere. Leave them at a coffee shop or leave them somewhere where somebody might pick them up.